Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. I'm your host, Andrew Langer. And if you are watching us on YouTube, please subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. We're going to get into letting everybody know. If you're watching us on YouTube, you know you can also find the Lunch Hour wherever fine podcasts are found. So you can take us with you wherever you want to go. You don't have to sit and watch us. You can also listen as well. But please leave us a review. Please subscribe and let everybody you know about the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. Now, as you all know, one of the issues that is very near and dear to my heart is the issue of energy policy and where things stand in America today. And it should be near and dear to your hearts as well, because we're going to talk about this, running headlong into a real crisis in terms of power generation, what we are going to be demanding and what we need. Joining me today is Robert Bryce. I want to go down the Scottish way there, Robert. He is an author, a journalist, and film producer. He has been writing about energy, power, and innovation for more than 3 decades. He is the author of 6 books, including most recently, A Question of Power, Electricity, and the Wealth of Nations. He has given nearly 500 invited or keynote lectures to groups ranging from the Marine Corps War College to the Sydney Institute, as well as to a variety of associations, universities, and corporations. He is the producer of 2 energy-focused documentaries, including the new 5-part docuseries, Juice, Power, Politics, and the Grid. He lives in Austin, Texas, which, as a friend of mine likes to say, is so close to Texas, with his wife, Lauren, who is an art teacher, photographer, and master potter. Follow him on Substack, Robert Bryce. That's BRYCE, robertbryce.substack.com. And Robert, listen, you've been lecturing on these issues. Tell us first about the docuseries, and we'll get into greater detail.
Sure. Well, thank you. Happy to be with you, Andrew. The docuseries, as you point out, Juice, Power, Politics, and the Grid, it's available for free. It's a 5-part series. You can find it at juicetheseries.com. Did I mention juicetheseries.com, Andrew? I hope I mentioned yes. juicetheseries.com. I'm proud of what we produced here. My colleague Tyson Culver directed it and did just a great job with animation, with the music, with the score, with original score. We did over 50 interviews. We have 35 people on camera interviewed in Canada, in Japan, in Europe, and of course here in the U.S., talking about the electric grid. And so what's the gist of the docuseries? We explain why the electric grid is so important to our everyday lives. As Dr. Chris Kiefer from Toronto points out, he says it's our civilizational life support system, which I think is a really great way to think about the electric grid. Why the grid is so important, why it's being undermined, why it's being fragilized, and that's bad energy policy, and what we need to do to fix it, which over the long term is, I believe very clearly, is going to be nuclear energy. But that's the episode, the gist of the docuseries in a nutshell. And I hope we can talk about some of the other specific episodes, including the episode that we did in Oklahoma, in Osage County. I'm a native of Oklahoma, proud native of Oklahoma, and what the wind industry did to the Osage Indian tribe there, the Native Americans in Osage County, is just an execrable example of corporate power and the arrogance of the wind industry in America.
Well, let's talk about this. So,
sure.
I do public policy, as I think one of our friends, our mutual friend, told you. And energy policy obviously is bound up in all of that. I also do media. And there was one day I remember specifically I was on the air and I just did a back of the napkin calculation in terms of the number of cars that we have in America and the demand that those cars would create. This is not even if you add in electric powered trucks. But I said to myself, did some notes, and I said, okay, we need between 3 and 5 times as much power to be generated in order to service an all-electric fleet. And that power needs to be fundamentally reliable. We are moving in the wrong direction. As you guys point out in this series, we are moving to less reliable sources of energy. Is that by design, or is that an oversight? I'm a firm believer, real quick, Robert, in Hanlon's razor, which is never attribute to malice that which can just as easily be attributed to stupidity. But I gotta think there's far too much stupidity going wrong or going on for it to be just inadvertence. What are your thoughts here?
Andrew, some of this policy, a lot of the policy that is coming out of this administration is simply inexplicable. And let me be clear about my politics. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm disgusted. I'm totally, totally disgusted. And I have no brief, with either party. I don't represent the energy industry. I'm an independent journalist. I'm a reporter. Right. But what this administration is doing, I've never seen anything like it. On April 18th, in the Federal Register, they published their final rule requiring automakers by 2032 to be selling 2/3 of their vehicles must be EVs, roughly 20 or 60%, depending on how you interpret the rule. And it's a massively long rule. Well, okay, so they're going to mandate the kind of cars that Americans can buy. And as you say, it's going to result in a massive increase in electricity demand on the electric grid, which is already faltering under existing demand. Right. We're seeing more blackouts, more warnings from the independent system operators, the RTOs, North American Electric Reliability Corporation, all warning about the reliability of the grid. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, all warning about the reliability of the grid. And exactly a week later, on April 25th, the EPA promulgates or finalizes another rule that's going to kneecap the coal-fired power plants and the natural gas-fired power plants in America. So I truly say this, again, not as a partisan, just as an observer, as a reporter. Do these people even read their own press releases? Because their policies are in a total conflict with each other. And I don't understand how they reconcile them. And the idea that, we'll replace it all with wind and solar, the last quick fact, last year, despite coal-fired capacity or generation in the United States falling, and it's falling pretty dramatically, last year in America, the generation from coal-fired power plants was greater than the generation from solar and wind combined. Oh, well, we're just going to replace that. Well, go slowly and explain how you're going to do this, because I'm from Oklahoma. I'm a little dumb. It doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't make sense, Andrew.
This is the same conversation I've had with folks in the chemistry industry, right? The only way, let's start with this perspective for a minute, Robert, right? Let's assume for a moment that we stop burning oil and oil-based products for energy, whether it's oil that gets refined into gasoline for cars, or whether it's natural gas that comes out of the earth. It's all a whole byproduct of these things. We still need oil for plastics, and we need the chemistry industry, because the only way we're going to have cars that can go 1,000 miles on a 30-minute charge, I'm sorry, 30 minutes is generous, but we'll really need a 6-minute charge, 3-minute charge, whatever. The only way we're going to get to build cars that are strong enough to carry a family is through the chemistry industry, and this ability of manipulating hydrocarbon atoms or hydrocarbon molecules to produce the high tensile plastics that we would need for these things. And yet the Biden administration has been going after and attacking the chemistry industry to billions of dollars a year. So you think that this is really inadvertence, as opposed to, or really it's the left hand not talking to the right hand, as opposed to, by design, we just want to kneecap every industry, get people out of their cars, get them on mass transit. Not that I want you to conspiracy theorize for me, but
yeah, I don't know. I mean, it would be conjecture, Andrew, and I think about this a lot about, well, what's the motivation here? I can't address that. But I think if I just look at this from a pure politics standpoint, and I think about, okay, well, what's the motivating factor? What I see is that all of this policy is regressive on the poor and the middle class. All of this climate policy is regressive on the poor and the middle class. And who's promulgating it? It's these wealthy NGOs, climate-focused NGOs. I don't call them environmental groups. They're not environmental groups. They're not green groups. They're pressure groups. And they have budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars. Environmental Defense Fund, several $100 million. Sierra Club, over $150 million. NRDC, more than $150 million. They're just promoting policy. And the results of what their policy is, they don't really care. They don't, it's not their problem.
They're going to get their funding, and it's whoever is sort of behind the scenes who is able to benefit from this. And we've talked about certain people who benefit when the U.S. economy topples over. Liz Truss, who's the former prime minister of Great Britain, she calls them quangos, quasi NGOs. They both act in these nonprofit statuses, but they also benefit highly from the policies that they are calling for in these entities. And you're right. In the end, what's sort of, whether or not it's inadvertence or by design, is less material than the impact themselves. It's funny
Right.
you bring up FERC, because like there's one member of Congress, Sean Casten from Illinois, who was on the science committee and spent a lot of time a couple of summers ago talking about FERC. And the problem, of course, is that Casten's family made their money in so-called, and I'm using air quotes, folks who are listening, green energy, the concept of cogeneration technologies. They benefit from all this. Why nobody's talking about it, I don't know. But that's, in the end, the goal is the same. The American people get shortchanged about this.
Yeah.
But
I think if I can interrupt, Andrew, I think one of the key things here is just, will all of this work, right? So that's one of the points that we make in the docuseries, which again I'm very proud of. And again, my colleague Tyson Culver did a great job on directing. Sure. But let's look at this idea, these claims. Oh, we'll do it all with alternative energy. I don't call them renewables or clean or green; those are marketing terms. It's alt energy. So what about wind? And I've been a critic of the wind business for a long time. Will continue to be a staunch critic, because if the oil and gas industry acted like the wind industry is in rural America, it would be front page news in the New York Times. Sure. And yet it's completely ignored. So one of the stories that I'm very proud of is what we reported in episode 3. It's called Green Dreams is the episode. I'm from Oklahoma. I'm born and raised in Tulsa. I have deep roots in Oklahoma. My great uncle, Ernie Rapp, was a member of the Osage tribe. He was born in Fairfax, Oklahoma in 1909. He had a front row seat to the Reign of Terror in the 1920s, which is the subject, of course, of Martin Scorsese's film, Killers of the Flower Moon. Yeah. And what we've seen with Enel, the Italian company, is a lot of themes that mimic what happened during the Reign of Terror. Outsiders come in, take advantage of the tribe and its resources to make money. And what did Enel do? They built 84 wind turbines in Osage County on traditional Osage land and mined in the Osage tribe's mineral estate without the permission of the tribe. Wow. They were told twice by the Bureau of Indian Affairs to stop, including a direct letter to the company in 2014. Did Enel stop? No, they sped up the work, started working at night. And now fast forward, what happened in December, the longest running legal battle over wind energy in American history. The New York Times has not reported a single word on this, by the way. Wow. The federal court judge in Tulsa ruled on behalf of the tribe, saying Enel violated the tribe's sovereignty and ordered the removal of 84 wind turbines in Osage County, Oklahoma. Unprecedented ruling, and an enormous win for the tribe, and one that makes me incredibly happy, because my cousin Nora Rapp holds an Osage head right. I'm a member of the Cherokee tribe. This is a huge victory for Native American sovereignty in America. And the fact that these legacy outlets won't cover it because it doesn't fit the narrative, but it's in one of many indicators or examples of this land use conflict that's happening across the country, where big business, big corporations, big law firms are trying to push this alt energy stuff out onto the landscape with no concern really about climate change, but it's weakening the grid. And that's the point.
But let me ask you this. I mean, in terms of getting the story out there, we have, was highly touted, the first Native American Interior Secretary in American history, Deb Haaland, or Haaland, however you want to pronounce it. How come she isn't out there screaming to the high heavens about this situation on the Osage land?
Well, and this is simply, I think, about the money. This is, when in doubt, Andrew, you follow. I don't mean to burst your bubble here. This isn't about ideology; it's about cash, right? And so this administration has repeated this trope that somehow they're going to decarbonize the entire electric sector in the United States by 2035. It's not going to happen. It can't happen. It won't happen. But Holland is part of this effort to convince the public that they're somehow going to make this work, and they won't.
Two competing timelines, as you're talking about. The timeline of getting the power grid de-electrified by 2035,
decarbonized, yeah,
decarbonized. Sorry, and the getting Americans out of gas-powered cars by 2032, or a certain percentage of it. Let me ask you this, because this is nobody, I think, has done a study about this, sort of doing some kind of an engineering economic study about the cost of building these wind turbines versus the cost of building nuclear power plants, right? Everybody talks about the cost of building nuclear power plants, and most of that is due to the regulatory world that's out there.
Right.
There are no such, regulatory burdens placed upon. Has anybody done a fair study that absent or putting the regulatory burdens on a level playing field between nuclear and wind, how the two kinds of power generation fare?
I'm not aware of that kind of analysis. There may well be one, but let's talk about the nuclear part of this for just a second, because I'm adamantly pro-nuclear and have been for a long time. In my view, if you're anti-carbon dioxide and anti-nuclear, you're pro-blackout. Well, I am anti-blackout. And in fact, Tyson Culver, I mentioned earlier, we decided to do this docuseries after we were blacked out here in Austin back in 2021. We thought, wait a minute, if we live in Texas, this is the energy capital of the world. If this is going to happen here, what the hell's going on? And that was really one of the main reasons why we did the docuseries now and got it out 3 years later. Yeah. But let's be clear about the challenges facing nuclear energy. And yes, wind and solar can be deployed fairly rapidly, and there's a lot of capital, a lot of media support for that. Nuclear faces a lot of challenges on the regulatory front, and that's going to be difficult to overcome. Remember, NuScale Power, they're a publicly traded company, traded under the ticker SMR. It took them 6 years and $500 million to get a permit from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So if we're going to see new nuclear in the U.S., we have to reform the regulatory effort. And that's going to, if you can do that, I think the capital and the regulatory thing, the other issues will fall into line. But if you don't solve the regulatory issues, the capital won't come.
And let's also put a fine point on it. At the same time, it's the amazing thing to me. At the same time, we are calling for riskier kinds of energy generation, wind and solar. We are decommissioning nuclear power plants around the country, or working to decommission nuclear power plants around the country. We're also getting rid of hydroelectric dams, in the Southwest. And so we have to recognize that, again, at some point in time, with the increasing demand, we're not gonna be able to meet that demand. This is just gonna get worse, isn't it?
Well, and that's a point that I make in the piece that I published on Substack today, and I write almost exclusively on Substack, robertbryce.substack.com.
Got it.
And wind and solar are weather dependent. And so my bottom line on this, my bottom line on climate change is a concern. It's not our only concern. Right. But what I wrote in the piece, and I published it this morning, said if climate change means we'll face more extreme weather in the years ahead, hotter, colder, more severe temperatures for extended periods, it's total bonkers crazy town to make our most important energy network, the electric grid, dependent on the weather. Right. We need to make our electric system weather resilient, not weather dependent. And yet that's exactly what we're doing. And all the incentives, not all of the incentives, but at the federal level, the Inflation Reduction Act is throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at wind and solar. And it doesn't have any, there's no guidance on where it should be built. It's just, here's a big pile of money. Go build wind and solar. It's a real problem, Andrew. And I'm proud of the docuseries because I think our timing is good. There are a lot of people focused on the grid, but we have to be very sober about what we're doing here. And it's not, in my view, it's not about partisanship. It's not about left versus right. But if the grid fails, who gets hurt? It's the poor and the middle class. It's not the rich folks. They have Generacs. I'm getting a Generac. I
literally just had a conversation. If the administration succeeds in banning gas stoves and there's no incentive anymore to put gas lines in a community for day-to-day gas use and stoves, how are folks going to power their Generacs in these new communities? It's a legitimate concern. Let me turn our attention. Do you get into it? And the docuseries is called Juice: Power, Politics, and the Grid. Do you get into next generation nuclear power and how today's nuclear power generation is not our grandparents' nuclear power generation?
That's a really good question, Andrew. And I'll just preface it by saying we don't go deep into that. Sure. What we do is point out that Canada is going to clearly lead the nuclear renaissance. And we went to Canada, and I mentioned my friend, Dr. Chris Kiefer, who's this amazing character. He's an emergency room doctor in Toronto. He's like 6'9". He's a giant. And he came to nuclear advocacy kind of out of left field, but he became an incredibly influential figure. And now Ontario is going to expand the Bruce Power Station, the largest nuclear power plant in the world. They're redoing their nuclear plants at Darlington and Pickering. And they're building an SMR. Canada is really embracing nuclear, I think, faster, will succeed faster than any other country in the world. But let me, just back to the nuclear ideas about what are the options. There are many paper reactors now that are being proposed, seeking permitting. Bill Gates at TerraPower. There's a company called X Energy that has high temperature gas reactor. There are molten salt reactors. All of them have a lot of positive attributes. But it's one thing to talk about them, one thing to plan them, one thing to build the paper reactor. We have to commercialize them and get them deployed. Right. And unless until we do that, then it's all just a lot of as an old teacher, an old employee might say, it's just a lot of blah blah.
Yeah, it's two things. Just back to your point about carbon and climate and nuclear power. As I've always been fond of saying, if you're someone who believes or who advocates on climate change and you're not advocating for nuclear power, then for you it's a political issue as opposed to a scientific issue. And the other part of this is and now I've lost my train of thought. But in the end, right? We have to be looking at serious solutions to these issues, and yeah, we're not going to get there if we continue to go down this road. Let's talk about demand.
May I add just one quick point there, Andrew, about nuclear? I firmly believe this. You can be pro-nuclear, not give a damn about climate change. Sure. And so I don't really care about, my view on climate change. Climate change is a concern. It's not our only concern.
Right.
I'm an avid bird watcher, have been for 30 years.
Yes.
And yet we're building these wind turbines. What do? They kill birds. Oh, it's only a few. Oh, cats kill more birds. Bullshit. Right. Bullshit. I mean, yes, cats kill birds. They don't kill golden eagles. They don't kill bald eagles. They don't kill raptors. And yet there's this pass that's being given to the industry because of somehow they've been able to brand themselves and been able to influence the federal government to say, oh, don't worry about it. Give us a permit. We won't reveal all this. So the issue that I'm getting to is that it's not just about the wildlife, although I'm adamantly in favor of wildlife protection. It's about footprints and inputs. These wind projects, solar projects, they're low power density. If you have low power density, you have high resource intensity. That means you need more copper, more steel, more land, more neodymium iron boron magnets, more graphite, all of these things for batteries, all this other stuff. Nuclear has super high power density, so it has lower material inputs, and that's key. And it has a smaller footprint on the planet, and that's green.
This is why I keep talking to folks about doing some kind of a comparative study on this, because I think once the truth will out, and I think you're right, it doesn't really matter in the end, because also it gets into energy abundance, right? Let's assume for a moment that we don't have to go all electric vehicle in the next 15 years. Let's assume a whole host of things. Our energy demands are going to continue to increase. As I was talking to somebody last week, I did an interview with Jim Pinkerton, who's written a book about investing. Jim Pinkerton used to be on Fox, who says, every AI computation on a computer uses 16 times as much energy as, a normal sort of computation. And so if we're going to be relying more on AI, that means we need 16 times more electricity being generated. We're going to need more power either way, and it's got to be reliable. When I used to lobby for small business, that was a whole issue. It wasn't so much about price, so much as it was about reliability. You are absolutely correct in all this. And you point out, actually, in this, when in 2008, Arnold Schwarzenegger required California's utilities to sell increasing volumes of renewable energy, and electricity rates have tripled. Talk about that and the impact on poor, especially the elderly in places like California's Central Valley.
Yeah. Well, and this is the critical point. When you look at California, a lot of people hold up California. Oh, this is the model we should follow. California has the highest poverty rate in America when accounting for cost of living. This has been shown by the Census Bureau, many other analysts showing this very thing. And yet what has happened now, it's since Schwarzenegger mandated renewables in California in 2008, there was about a third of the electricity had to be from wind and solar by a certain date. Now that is 100% clean electricity mandate. Electricity prices in California have just exploded. And who does that hurt? It hurts the poor. It hurts the middle class. It hurts the people on fixed incomes. And yet there's not even any hint of a discussion about the regressive nature of all these policies. And Andrew, I think when you look at all these climate policies, all of them are regressive. Right. Electric vehicle mandates. Oh, you're going to force the carpenter, the bricklayer, the landscape guys to drive a Tesla. They can't afford a Tesla. They can barely afford a beat up old Ford pickup. You know, and I say that with all due respect. That's what they can afford. Right. But it's all regressive, and yet there's no discussion of any of this. So increasingly, I'm of the mind. I think this is verifiably true. The battle in America is not so much left versus right; it's top versus bottom. It's class. And I think that is one of the reasons why it explains the appeal of Trump. And again, I'm no fan of Biden, no fan of Trump. I don't carry a brief for either one. I might write your name in for president.
Well, please do.
You get a helicopter. That's cool. I think that would be cool. A helicopter, you get to fly a Marine One. I'd be all about that. I'd fly that thing all over the place. But it's about class, and that's the battle in America. And I think that's a big part of the appeal of Trump for a lot of people in rural America, urban America. They're looking at this guy and saying, well, he's opposed to those assholes in Washington. I'm with him.
Right. And it gets down to, right, it's so funny. It was a very telling moment as gas prices began to start creeping up last year. And Joe Biden, and again, not to be partisan about this, is just what happened. Joe Biden was lamenting the fact that folks can drive down the street and see multiple reminders about how bad the energy policy is of this administration as they move us to less reliable forms of energy. Listen, before I let you go, let's talk about some of your earlier work. How'd you get into the docu-series industry? What were you doing beforehand?
Well, I've written 6 books, and my latest one is A Question of Power, Electricity, and the Wealth of Nations. And when I was writing that book, starting the work on that, I thought, oh, well, electricity, this is a cool subject. I should do a documentary too. How hard can that be? Oh, yeah. well, it can be pretty darn hard, it turns out. And the fact is, I got it done. We did finish the first documentary called Juice, How Electricity Explains the World. It came out 5 years ago. That's a feature-length film, and it's available on wherever fine films are found. It's available on YouTube for free. And then we thought, well, we'll do another one because of the blackout. I thought after the first project, I'm done with documentaries. They take too long. There's too much friction. But then in my heart, I felt called to do it. And I don't use that as a flip way, but I felt like, well, I'm the one who has some experience in this. Sure. I know what I'm talking about. I know some people that can help us get it done. And so that was really it. And now I really am done. I'm not going to make another documentary. I made 2. That's enough. But, I feel a responsibility given how I'm going to be 64 this year. This is my purpose and my passion. This is what I do. I care about energy and power. I want to keep them cheap, abundant, reliable. And I've been incredibly fortunate to be able to do this, and it's been a lucrative career. But a lot of people are interested in what I'm writing about, and so I count myself incredibly lucky.
Now, and I ask this of all of my guests, because I think it's important for folks to understand that our guests are not single dimensional. I see you have guitars on your wall. You live in Austin, Texas. You're from Oklahoma. When you're not doing this kind of work, what are some of your outside interests?
Well, my family. I'm very proud of my wife, Lauren. She's a potter, an artist, a photographer. We spend a lot of time together. We walk, we swim, we travel a lot together. So my family is my first priority and my first and the most important thing in my life. And so I can be with my kids, be with my daughter Mary, who's here in Austin. And then lately I'll have to say, hobbies have not been a top priority. I play guitar badly. I'm kind of the perennial beginner, but I'm traveling a lot because I have 34 speaking engagements on my calendar this year. So wow. I'm on the road a lot, but I'm just count myself incredibly lucky to be able to do that. So it's not that work is my hobby, but it takes a lot of my time.
Well, you live in a beautiful part of the world. The Texas Hill Country is my family spent a lot of time there over the years. We did a vacation a couple of years back where it was a tour of Texas Hill Country swimming holes. the Hamilton Pool, which is near you, and Wimberley, the places down there. So I love that part of the work. Well, thank you. Listen, the docuseries is Juice, Power, Politics, and the Grid. And you're going to give me that website once again, Robert.
Oh, no, I'm going to give it to you 3 times.
Okay, good.
JuiceTheSeries.com. Did I mention JuiceTheSeries.com? I hope I mentioned JuiceTheSeries.com. It's free. It's fabulous. Check it out and share it, subscribe. And yes, thank you.
And we can find you on Substack, where you write just about every day, don't you?
Not every day. I'm trying to get at least one piece out a week. I just published a piece on Build It and the Wind Won't Come. Came out on my Substack, robertbryce.substack.com. It's free too.
robertbryce.substack.com. Well, listen, Robert, thank you so very much for joining us today.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you, Andrew.
This has been yet another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal News Wire. As I've said, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can take a listen wherever fine podcasts are found on those podcast platforms. If you're listening to us there, take a watch here after you've watched Robert's docuseries of Juice on YouTube. You can also watch us here, other episodes of the Lunch Hour. Please subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and let everybody you know about what we're doing here at the Lunch Hour with Federal News Wire. I'm Andrew Langer. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal News Wire Lunch Hour Podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal News Wire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.